are a political writer and author of a book entitled The Great Pretenders, Race and Class Under ANC Rule. And you have some very strong views about the issue playing out in the Middle East. And of course, we're talking about the genocide against the Palestinian people by the Israelis. Assalamu alaikum, welcome to the program.
Walaikum salam. I'm very sorry for these technical issues we've had.
Yes, the age of technology, what can I say? Let's see progress with the interview. You've written an article, you're demanding that the South African government needs to take a firm stand and cut all ties with Israel. What do you believe that us as a country, South Africa, perhaps maybe the only country or one of the few black, brown countries that cut ties with Israel is going to make a difference as far as their atrocities are concerned? They're still going to carry on regardless.
Well, it's difficult to say in advance that such strong action will lead to no significant changes on the part of Israel towards the Palestinians and their rights and demands, especially in the occupied territories. You have to realize that this comes against the backdrop of ongoing battles and wars between the Palestinians and the Israelis. I really think that the bombing of Gaza and what has happened over the past 10, 12 days, has led the entire world. If you look at the massive protests across the world, I really think that now is the time, if ever there's going to be joint international action to address the root causes of the Palestinian issues. It is now. It is now. You've never seen such spontaneous protests around the world in the light of what Israel did in Gaza. And bear in mind that even the rockets that were shot into Israel was a response, as I indicated in the Sunday Times article, to the provocation by Israel. You also must remember that during the Ramadan month, if you go and do some research, you will see Israelis were taunting and provoking Muslim people during the month of Ramadan in various places in Israel, including around mosques. So this thing was building up. And then later on, I'll ask mosque what had happened there. So there is a background to that firing of rockets into Israel. But as I stressed in the Sunday Times article, which has always been the case in the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians, is the entirely disproportionate retaliation of the Israelis. And you've seen it probably most graphically now over the past 2 weeks.
I know you in the article you're also talking about you referred to Joe Biden's statement, quote, that Israel has a right to defend itself when you have thousands of rockets flying into your territory. That's laughable, isn't it? Coming from a world leader of his stature.
But obviously, you shouldn't be surprised. Israel would never be in power. Let me tell you, was it not for the United States? There's support from Britain, also France and other countries, But was it not for the United States? You would never have even the occupation that has continued in Israel, in the occupied territories. Much of what the Israeli military aggression and what they've done, the wanton destruction that you see now with the Gaza bombing, would never have occurred. Was it not that they are so fully aware of the support, the unstinting, almost unconditional support that the United States has given Israel over the years.
They are looking after their own interests, aren't they? I mean, there's a lot of resources that they are protecting by having Israel in that very strategic area, taking care, looking after United States and other Western countries' interests, all the natural resources, the oil, etc.
But that is, in fact, that's why I spoke about the Balfour Declaration of 1917. You got to go back. I mean, it's for long that is an oil-rich area of the world, probably one of the most oil-rich areas. And in fact, the Balfour Declaration and British support for the establishment of the State of Israel was due to geological considerations and these questions of oil access. That is was it not for oil, I don't think you would have had this unstinting support of the United States. The United States economy, and in fact the global, depends so much on oil. So a whole lot of strategic considerations went into, and consistently so, the role that Israel, I mean the United States has played vis-a-vis the conflict in this is going on for decades. It's nothing new. It's in fact over a century now. Balfour Declaration was 1917, so you're talking about 104 years this has been in the making. And really, nothing other than concerted action. That's why I raised the question of how the world stood together against apartheid, especially during the last decade of apartheid rule. If only we could have seen such global solidarity as we experienced, and it played a big part in the downfall of apartheid and the 1994 watershed democratic elections in South Africa, was the role of the United Nations. In fact, United States itself, Britain, they played leading roles in persuading the ANC, the former Nationalist Party, to reach a settlement. And now look against that background, what they've, and I mean, all the attempts by the rabbi, who wrote a piece in the Sunday Times also attempting to excuse and explain away, the military aggression of Israel is laughable, because what he doesn't do in that piece, he doesn't dig into history at all. He doesn't go into the circumstantial context, why Hamas had fired rockets into Israel. He deals with nothing of that sort. Instead, he appeals to the President Ramaphosa, and attacking, the statement that he had made, that the attacks in Gaza was so reminiscent of the apartheid atrocities that we faced in South Africa. I think really he did the Jewish cause, if one can call it that, a disservice by that article in the Sunday Times. It left so much, it left much to be desired, let me say, and certainly, his religious views on that conflict. And religion is a huge factor in the Palestinian, and not enough attention is paid to that, why, in fact, they insisted on the creation of the State of Israel, that it's a, it just vindicates what the Bible had said about the, So it's a factor that I think we need to increasingly include in debates about what has happened, because it's one of the major pillars of the creation of the State of Israel, and the continued military aggression to sustain its rule there.
We're hoping here on the show to get hold of Professor Ilan Papi to talk about the history of Palestine and the Israelis, how they got to their supposed promised land, but that's for another show. But have you had any response to your article by the South African government? And I'll also end off by reading the last paragraph of your article, which says, in fact, unless the world finally finds the resolve to take the kind of bold and concerted action against Israel that it did against apartheid in in its decades of rule, history will not only condemn the inaction, but also hold it partly responsible for the current genocide by Israel against the Palestinian people. So, two responses: one from the South African government, and your closing paragraph of the article.
Well, the South African government, you must remember even when I made that statement in the concluding last paragraphs, I'm very cognizant. You got to realize that there's something behind the reluctance of the ANC to take firm action. And in fact, the globe. Jewish people play a very important part in the South African and hugely important. So behind the support for Israel has been the power, the economic power. South Africa, Jewish businessmen, and there's played a big part in. So the ANC is very cognizant of this, but. One must bear in mind that we're dealing now, which I think compelled Ramaphosa to make that statement. I mean, I really think that what they did, this bombing in Gaza over the past 2 weeks, was probably the worst ever, arguably, since the formation of the state, illegitimate, unlawful formation in 1948. But the other part of this thing is that, one is hoping, I had hoped that that article will, perhaps contribute to getting the ANC government to take stock of this situation. Because you need a combination of pressures here. You need the South African government and the United Nations, but you've got serious problems there. Look how the Security Council hesitated just to issue a statement condemning Israel. And they were blocked by the United States, by Joe Biden and them. So, there are global forces at work, and in whose interests, the continuation of Israeli rule in that part of the world and the denial of Palestinians of their rights and legitimate demands is at stake here. It's not a simple conflict. This is, in fact, there's hundreds of years, there's centuries involved here in what has happened in the Middle East, It's not an easy conflict. It's one of the most combustible ones in the world for decades, arguably. But I'm hoping that the article really does, at least galvanize the ANC government to perhaps make it known in no uncertain terms to the Israeli ambassador and the state of Israel that the situation has to change there fundamentally in Palestine, I mean, for too long. I mean, what Israel, with the support of the United States, has done, I don't think there's another part of the world. Why do you think Ireland, who knows firsthand what brutal colonization at the hands of British imperial colonialism has done, has come out in unstinting support for the Palestinian cause? I don't think there's another country, and you look at its own history, you'll see it's reflected in that history, why Ireland has been so consistently in support of the Palestinian struggle.
Dr. Harvey, can I ask you, and this discussion's been coming up a lot, the one-state solution and the two-state solution. Is it workable? Is the two-state solution workable? My thinking is that if they do go that route, the Palestinians will still be marginalized. And does that mean if they do go the two-state solution route, I know lots of negotiation will have to be undertaken, but will the Israelis give back all the land that they usurped over the years from the Six-Day War, the 1967 war, etc., etc., etc.? So lots to be taken into account before you reach that point. But is it workable?
I don't know if you've looked at commentary globally after this, even after this temporary truce was reached a couple of days ago. Most analysts predict that, in fact, what Israel did and this recent conflict has doomed prospects for the two-state solution. But I must tell you, I've got a number of articles to prove that. I've been an opponent for very realistic reasons of the two-state solution. You will never get Israel voluntarily giving back the territories that have been conquered and conquest. Never. You know what you'll happen. The best case scenario, which is terrible, is where Palestine functions almost as the Bantustans did in South Africa.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Hope to talk to you again sometime soon. Thank you indeed for the article and your thoughts.
Okay, thanks.
Ebrahim Harvey.
All right, thank you. Alaikum salam. Thanks.